Good morning. Good Saturday morning. I hope you're having a good Saturday. I'm not too late. 8:05, but that's a good date because that's my birthday. 8:05, right? Anyway, I hope you're having a good week. Hope you're getting all geared up for Christmas. I'm supposed to go look at some Christmas lights tonight. Excited about that. And hope Chris likes it. I know the grandkids will like it. So getting all geared up here. That's about all I do for Christmas. Let's go look at Christmas lights, and it's over. Well, actually, we got a Christmas blessing yesterday, but you have to look at Chris's group page to find out what that was. So, but anyway, just hope you're having a good time. So I was my brain's been all over the place this morning, and I know that's not anything new. That's that's all the time, right? But I was just thinking about how God could have left out all the bad parts of the Bible. Now, I'm not saying the Bible's bad, but there's some stories in there that have some really rough stuff. For instance, here's the one I was thinking of, Matthew 14, when Jesus comes to them walking on the water, and Peter says, if this is really you, tell me to come. And Jesus says, come, and he jumps out of the boat and he walks on water, and he could have ended it right there. He could have not told us that Peter was going to look around at the storm and sink, right? He could have left the bad part out, the not so good part out. But he didn't. He could have left the story of Cain and Abel out because that's not a good thing. His brother killed his brother, right? He could have left some of the parts of Samson and Delilah. Think about that story. That's a horrible that's a horrible thing to happen to a person, right? He let her trick him and he told her his secret eventually. Then they poked his eyes out. They could have left that out, right? We could have not had Daniel in the lion's den. They could have just said, and Daniel served God all of his life. Because sometimes we get the mindset that it's like a Disney movie, right? Where everything turns out all right, and Daddy's always come home, and Christmas is always beautiful, and everything is hunky dory. Even though you go through a rough part, and so he could have left that out. As a matter of fact, when I was in Chicago, I visited a church. I think I went twice because I was trying to figure out what was wrong with it, what they're teaching, because it was out of the Bible and it was pretty good. But I started realizing they didn't ever sing anything about the power of God and the blood of Christ, and they didn't talk about things like David and Goliath. They wanted to take all the violence out of the Bible. And while I'm not saying let's support violence. I don't like violence either. But I'm like, if we take all the violence out of the Bible, we have to take all the good stuff out too. Because what happened here, when Peter sunk, Jesus reached out and put him in the boat. Right? He said, Lord, save me. And immediately Jesus stretched out his hand and caught him and said, you have a little faith, you have some doubt, but let's get back in the boat. And I think for me, it encourages me to see the tough spots in the Bible, and even if you read like the Psalms, David is kind of the key psalmist we talk about. There's a lot of other psalmists. There was Moses, there was Asaph, there was several different psalmists that contributed to the 150 psalms that we have. But so many times their heart was, what am I going to do? There's all this going on. And yet it always comes back around to, oh yeah, God's with me in those things too. And so we can use the stories in the Bible and know that when we face difficult circumstances, we face difficult situations or tough decisions, that God still got us. He had them, and God doesn't change. And it can bring that comfort of, wow, Peter walked on the water, and Jesus didn't say, well, you dummy. He didn't. He did say, you have so little faith. Why did you doubt? What would Peter have done had he not doubted? Because it says Peter looked around and saw the storm. He saw that the wind was boisterous, and he was afraid. He got afraid. And sometimes when we're in our circumstances and situations of life, we look around when it gets boisterous. That's a good old word there, right? It gets rough. It gets difficult. It's overwhelming. It can be, fill in the blank for whatever you're going through. When we look at that, we're going to lose heart because he had to look away from Jesus to look at those things. Had Peter kept his eyes on Jesus, he'd have walked right out to him. Why, how differently would the story have read? But you know what? Jesus didn't take that story out because Peter failed in that moment. He turned that moment around and made it a teachable moment where he says, why did you doubt? Don't doubt. Don't look at the storm. right? Now, and we've talked about David a lot and how he stood before Goliath and he didn't look at Goliath and compare Goliath himself to Goliath and go, "Ooh, I'm so little and Goliath is so big." He looked at God and went, "Wow, Goliath, you're really little when I look at God first." Right, so he left the story in there. It was a good. That was it had a really good ending, right? And we know how that one ended because then God delivered Goliath into David's hand, and that's what David said when he stood there and faced Goliath. Is yeah, I know you're big. I know you're 10 times bigger than me. I know you got a big spear. I know you got a big sword. I know, but God's going to deliver you into my hand today. So he looked past Goliath at God. Had Peter looked past the storm and kept his eyes on Jesus, we don't even know what that story would have read like, right? And so God left the tough stuff in the Bible. You know, we got the story of Gideon. God used Gideon to do some great things. They beat the Midianites with just 300 men, and it says they were facing an innumerable army, which meant they didn't even know how many people that army had. But God took Gideon and 300 men and defeated that army, right? And then later, Gideon loses faith. In the end, he made an idol and caused the people to stumble. God could have left that part out, but he didn't because he wanted us to know that no matter what we face, no matter if we look at the storm, it's not over just because we looked away from him and at the storm. It's not over just because we messed up after a big defeat, after a big victory, right? God wants us to know that it's not over, and he left the bad stuff in there so that we could look at that and go, you know what? All these people were human because we read their stories and we have it like a Disney movie and well, it's a character. But no, these were people. Peter was a real person and he really walked on the water and he really looked at the real storm and sunk. But Jesus really reached out and picked him up and put him back in the boat and saved him that day, right? That night. I guess it was night. And so, but Jesus had told them, he said, go and get in the boat and go to the other side. They got scared because they didn't have the faith to get to the other side, but Jesus helped them. Now, I want to compare this to Abraham. When you know the story in Genesis 22, where God told Abraham, sacrifice Isaac, and Abraham told the people, his servants, he said, me and the boy, we're going to go up and worship and we will come back, because he knew God had given him Isaac as that promise. And he knew that Isaac was the key to really us, to having an innumerable people who were going to follow Christ throughout the years, right? And so he knew that he believed God's promise so much that he said, we're going to go up there and we'll be back. He didn't say, we're going to go to the mountain and I'll be back in a minute. He said, we're going to go up there and worship and we'll be back. He knew that God could raise him from the dead. Now that's faith, right? And here the disciples are in the middle of the sea. They see a storm and they're getting all scared. They forgot Jesus said, let's go to the other side. Had they held on to that, they wouldn't have been quite as scared in the storm. And so my whole thing is, we can use the bad parts, the rough spots, the failures that we see in these humans in the Bible to understand that God's got us too, right? He's going to walk through that. He walked out on the water to his disciples. How he did that, I don't know. Right? But he walked out to them. He didn't go, hope y'all make it. No, he could have miraculously appeared on the other side and been there going, well, y'all made it. Well, barely. He could have done it so differently, but he walked out on the water to where they were in that storm. He didn't wait till the storm passed. He didn't say, yeah, that's some wind, I'm going to wait here. He walked out to them in their rough spot and brought them to the other side. But had they held on to what he said, and my encouragement for that for you is to look at what he said right here on this Bible. Read it every day. Put it in your heart so that you know what he has said, and then you can hold on to that. Had they said, you know what, Jesus told us to go to the other side. He is not going to send us to the other side and we ain't going to make it. Right? They could have held on to that in the middle of the storm. God, he's always got something you can hold on to in the middle of the storm. If it's Isaiah 26:3, I will keep him in perfect peace whose mind is stayed on me. Right? There's always different things, different scriptures to hold on to for any situation. We can trust God with our heart We can trust him in the storm. We can trust him in the trial. We can trust him in the hard spots because he left them in the Bible so we could see they had to work through it to faith too, right? And that encourages me this morning. I hope it encouraged you. You guys, peace out. Have a great weekend. I'll see you Monday.